Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, we'll tell you about a new malicious Apache module that's so clever you'll never find it, the WordPress flaw that could expose your LAN, and the Samsung exploit you probably never heard about, plus a big batch of your questions and our answers. All that and a heck of a lot more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 89 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This episode was recorded live on December 20th, 2012. This episode's brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible ScaleEngine.com, which I embrace our scaling overlords. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is the proprietor of that scale engine and our host, the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, man. Welcome to episode 89.
That's a big number.
TechSNAP train's blowing out the 80 series with a big show this week. Big show. Yes. Big show. In fact, I would say a few of these stories in here are some of the bigger, well, we'll see. I'll say at the end of the show, I'll make that call. But I would say we definitely have some of the most junk in our trunk that we've had in a long time. We have a huge roundup this week. And we have some great feedback, too. So I'm really looking forward to jumping into all of this stuff, Alan.
Yep.
Should we start with our first news story, which might be bad news for Apache users?
It's not specific, but anyway.
All right. First, I'm thinking, I'm so glad I'm not an Apache user anymore.
Well, there's that. But really, it's not a problem with Apache. It's a problem with your machine gets compromised and you happen to have Apache, and this just uses your Apache in a way. Anyway, there's an updated version of a rogue Apache module that injects iframes into the website you serve.
Awesome.
So we saw there was a rootkit that did something like this. There was actually a rootkit for the Linux kernel that was causing this to happen even on Nginx servers. But this one's specifically a module for Apache, which is a common target because Apache is like 50% of all web servers times, millions of web servers.
Right.
And it's a module that's only ever distributed as a Linux 64-bit binary. So, if you're running FreeBSD and you don't have Linux emulation loaded, then it's obviously not going to work on your machine. But also, people aren't going to compromise your machine if you're running FreeBSD instead of Linux.
I guess in this case, Apache would even be safer on Windows then.
Yes. Although someone could make a Windows module if enough. But hopefully there's not that many people using Windows as a web server. But anyway.
Well, I know, right? I think it happens, though, surprisingly.
It does happen. And at least they're using Apache instead of IIS.
Yeah. Hey, now we're going to get emails because the new IIS in Server 2008 is supposed to be pretty great.
I'll believe that.
Okay.
Never.
All right.
Anyway. Okay. So the module is known as Linux/Chapro or Chapro.a.
Okay.
Although other researchers had discovered it a little bit earlier, and they called it Dark Leech. But when ESET finds it, they give it a Linux, a virus definition name instead of just a random name.
Okay.
Anyway, so it's loaded into an Apache server, and it causes it to inject iframes into the pages that are normally served by that Apache server. The interesting thing about this particular version of the module is the way it hides from administrators and even users and researchers.
Oh.
So when they saw it, the iframes load the content from the malicious sites and usually infect the visitor with something like the Zeus Trojan, which we've talked about before. It's the banking malware. Mm-hmm. Although the iframe was seen giving out different malware, including the new Sweet Orange exploit kit.
Oh.
Which we'll talk a little bit more later in the story.
Okay.
So, what makes this module exceedingly clever compared to previous ones or even that Linux rootkit one is the number of techniques it uses to try to hide itself and prevent it from being discovered. For starters, the module checks all the open SSH connections on the server that the module is running on, and won't serve the malware if the visitor is coming from the same IP address as someone who's logged into the server.
Uh-huh.
So if you're the administrator of the server or the developer of the website,
you're not going to see it.
And you're SSH'd into it, you're not going to see the iframes popping up in your pages because the module's smart enough to say, hey, you're an administrator or something, you're logging into our SSH, let's not try to infect you.
That is really clever.
Yeah. The malware also looks at the user agent string and purposely doesn't serve the malware if it's like a search bot or crawler. So when it sees Google or MSN, it doesn't return the malware.
Oh, to avoid like that flagging they do.
Right, to avoid things like Google's safe browsing system.
Right.
Where Google in Chrome or Firefox will block a website saying, hey,
This website's
we
not
saw
safe."
malware on this website, you probably don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But also to block machines that are not likely to be vulnerable to the malware they're throwing out. So if it sees like OS 10, Mac, Linux, BSD, or a mobile device thing in the user agent, it doesn't bother with the iframe either.
This is
Right?
clever.
So if you're the designer of the website or whatever, you have a Mac, you don't see it because your Mac isn't vulnerable to the Trojan they feel like throwing out. No, they could change that if they happen to have a Trojan that does affect Macs and say, hey, if it's a Mac, we'll send this iframe, and if it's a Windows, we'll send this iframe. Right? But in this case, they're just not sending one if they see a Mac. The malware also doesn't attempt to infect the same user twice.
Geez, that's clever too.
So it talks to the command and control server and basically keeps a list of the IP addresses of everyone it's ever shown the malware to.
Gosh.
And if it sees that person again, it won't show them the second time. So, if someone gets infected and then goes back to the sites they went to try to figure out which one infected them, they won't see the virus anymore. Or, if you're a researcher and all of a sudden it stops giving you the virus and you're like, what's going on here?
Right.
Did they fix it or what happened? And also, it marks you with a cookie when you visit the site. And if you have that cookie, no malware for you. So even if your IP address changes, it doesn't try to infect you a second time. All this is designed to make it so that nobody figures out that it's an Apache module that's serving up this virus.
This is incredible. This is really great. I mean,
also,
like
the
in a
remote
genius way, not in like I want this way.
The remote command and control server also determines the content of what gets injected. So that means that they can change what code is injected into the website, like where the iframe points to, from their command and control server. So they could have different servers throwing out different malware, or be like, hey, Microsoft has patched the flaw that this malware uses. Let's throw out this other malware instead. Or, this one's detected by virus scanners now, so let's switch to this version that's not. Or the server we were pointing at for people to download the malware, that got taken down because it was serving up malware. So let's point it to a new server, and so on. So those factors make it a lot harder for the administrator or the site owner or whatever to determine that it's, in fact, their server that's injecting the iframe. Right? Because if a bunch of users are saying, hey, I went to your website and I keep getting this iframe that's trying to infect me with a virus, I'm the administrator. I go to the website and it's like, it doesn't come up for me. So maybe you have a virus on your computer that's injecting the iframes on your side. Meanwhile, it's just the server not injecting it to me because I'm logged into that server over SSH at the same time. Right? And so it makes it harder to narrow down. But also researchers and even just users have a lot harder time figuring out which site infected them, because if they go back, they don't get it anymore.
Yeah, troubleshooting just is dealt a major blow by doing this.
Yeah. It basically allows it to be a lot stealthier. So as we know, the Zeus Trojan targets users of European and Russian banks and attempts to steal their credentials, including just like their PIN number for their cards or the CVC or CVV value. On your credit card, there's that little 3-digit number on the back. Mm-hmm. And according to the PCI DSS, companies aren't allowed to store that number. So when a company's database of credit cards gets stolen, it never is supposed to include that CVV value. So that when a store is verifying that value, like Amazon or whatever, they can know that it's not a stolen credit card, because stolen credit cards aren't supposed to have that value.
Right.
Right. If I steal a database of credit cards from mom and pop's online bird store or whatever, because they're not supposed to store the CVV value, I won't have the CVV of the credit card and won't be able to enter it at Amazon. And so Amazon, it increases the security. Right. Although there are some places that store it, which is against the PCI DSS, and they could get in trouble if they get caught, but they usually only get caught when their database leaks and they've compromised the value of all those cards.
Right.
Anyway, So the banks have started putting up warnings on their login page saying that, don't our website will never ask you for your PIN, the CVC or CVV value. But the Trojan on your computer is removing that warning.
Oh, lovely.
So if you're infected, you go to your bank, you don't see the warning telling you not to give your computer the PIN or CVV value for your card while you're on their website.
Now that's attention to detail.
Now, I'm not sure if that is because the Trojan is presenting a version of the login page itself,
right,
from before the warning was there, to make sure that if the bank made changes to the login page, it wouldn't break the Trojan, or if they're actually stripping out the warning. So I don't know if they're just presenting a static version of the login page always, or if they're actually modifying the live version of the page and only removing certain warnings.
Wouldn't you think a static page would be a little more secure for them, because the bank could make changes to circumvent it.
Right, but if the bank made changes to like say change the variable name of the username field,
yeah,
that would make it break the Trojan. Whereas if they're just modifying the version of the page the bank sends on the fly, it wouldn't break the Trojan. So it's hard to say which way they're doing it.
Right.
The easiest way to tell is if the bank put up a non-suspicious warning, like saying, hey, there's a holiday coming up. Our Christmas hours are these.
Yeah.
If you make a transaction on Christmas Day, it won't show up until Thursday or whatever.
Right.
If that showed up through the Trojan, then we'd know. But, that's just anecdotal evidence. Anyway. Yes, the Apache module has also been seen to deliver the new Sweet Orange exploit kit.
Yeah, okay.
Which is claiming a much higher infection rate than most other exploit kits. The developers claim 10 to 25% infection rate, and that they can drive like 150,000 users a day to the websites that infect them. And apparently they have 45 dedicated IP addresses and 267 unique domain names set up for this Trojan so that they can avoid blacklisting by slowly rotating through those domains.
Right.
And researchers have found an alarmingly low detection rate for the exploits in this kit. They ran like 20 of the domain names that they've discovered so far through the scanner, and only 7 of them were detected. And I forget how many IP addresses they tried, but 0 of them were detected. It's yet to be seen whether this newcomer will compete with the existing popular exploit kits like Black Hole, but we'll see.
Now, one thing that I find interesting is whenever these things, I don't know about Sweet Orange, but the Apache module exploit, it's going back to a command and control server where they can say, yeah, we've already seen that IP or whatever. Doesn't that seem like that's inherently a mechanism to track down who's controlling this malware in the first place? Like, it seems like it's like...
Right, well, that would assume that the attackers are, say, directly connecting to the command and control server, right? If they go through 1 or 2 hops first, then...
Yeah, but even still, you think you could track down who hosted it, unless they compromised somebody else's system and made it the command and control system.
Likely that's what it is, or, you pay for the server that's hosting the command and control server with stolen money.
Yeah. Or right? Bitcoins. Ooh, Bitcoins.
Yeah.
Those are evil and scary. Okay.
But, oftentimes, if they're doing the Zeus Trojan or whatever, they can just use one of the victim's bank accounts to pay for the server.
Yeah, that's true, huh?
Right?
Yeah. I guess so. Little identity theft on top of things, and why not? All right, well, any other thoughts on that one?
No, that's it for that one.
All right, so links to that, and some of this work was done by the folks over at ESET, which make the Nod 32, and then it looks like some of the Sweet Orange stuff was done by folks at Blue Coat Security.
Yes.
Which is
and
impressive.
I think Kaspersky was in on something in there as well.
Those guys. All right, Alan, now, a little something for WordPress users, right?
Yes. Researchers have basically exploited an old design flaw in WordPress to turn it into an island hopping machine.
Oh, great. How useful for doing things like what we just talked about.
It's more for compromising like LANs in this case. But so WordPress and many other blogging platforms have a feature called pingback. Basically, it's designed so that when I write a blog and I reference, say, an episode of TechSNAP,
sure.
My website calls the TechSNAP website and says, hey, I'm talking about you. And then the pingback feature on the TechSNAP website will then check the URL I've referenced and see that, oh, yes, you are actually talking about TechSNAP. So in the comments, it adds a link to your story because it's related to our story. And it basically ends up creating bidirectional links between the websites. The way it works is basically the pingback is an xmlrpc interface, and you basically post to my website saying, hey, this URL is talking about you. And then the TechSNAP website will go to that URL and check and make sure it actually is. The problem is that the pingback request might not have actually came from the site who the request is claiming is talking about you. So, for example, I could call 10,000 WordPress blogs and tell them all that the PayPal.com is talking about them. And then all of them will then try to load PayPal.com. Right? So if I did that to, say, someone's small WordPress site hosted on a little virtual private server somewhere with, 25,000 WordPress blogs asking once a second, that would probably take their website offline.
Yeah. Well, I think back to before we were really...
you could point it at a large file on a site somewhere and use up all their bandwidth.
Oh,
right? It's called a bandwidth amplification attack.
That's almost probably more serious, huh?
I only have to send out small packets to get your server to do a lot of work.
I bet, yeah. And I think back to when we had Jupiter Broadcasting running off of a single Debian or Fedora Linux box in Server Beach, now Pier 1, and how when sometimes somebody would just script something to go scrape the Jupiter Broadcasting website to pull down all of our posts to catalog it locally, it would just bring my single server down to a crawl. And so you could see how something like this would probably be kind of a similar effect where and those always have finite bandwidth allocations too, which, this would burn through. So sort of a tricky little exploit.
Right. And so there's been a bug about this open on the WordPress bug tracker since 2007. The attacker or the reporter of the bug described a scenario where, pulling large files would end up hurting both the target website, but also all the websites that are being used as requesters.
Right.
It's going to use up, and they found that some of the sites were really big. Intel has a WordPress blog somewhere, and so you can use up. Their website probably has a really fat connection that you could pull a lot of stuff
WordPress.
from.
There's a lot of big WordPress sites.
Huge WordPress blogs, right? And that's a bandwidth amplification attack. And there's a
Canadian fly attacking you during the show.
You could use basically an extremely large number of WordPress sites, since there's millions and millions of them out there, to basically do a distributed denial of service attack. But the severity of the flaw is considered quite low because, there's easier ways to launch a denial of service attack. And there were some attempts to write patches to make the XMLRPC, the pingback system, never load more than 1 megabyte of data or something.
Yeah.
Although newer versions of WordPress use a different system for pingbacks, and they don't use the same thing, so the patches are all useless now. Because they use a different API now.
Right, they've changed it.
But basically, the bug was never considered a big deal, and nothing was ever done with it. However, a new research by Bogdan Kalin, who is the guy we talked about a couple of weeks ago, he came up with that system where by putting image tags or iframe tags pointing to your router in an email, you could change your DNS servers. Right? It was hacking people that hadn't changed the default password on the routers, and it would hack them.
Yep.
Especially if you had an iOS device where it didn't ask before loading pictures.
Yeah, like an HTML email and stuff. Yeah.
So the same guy has found more novel uses for this existing flaw.
Okay, good.
So the first one being that if you do a pingback to that router string URLs, then if the WordPress happens to be behind or on the same LAN as a regular router that's vulnerable to that, they can do that. Right? So basically, the WordPress makes the request over the LAN, right? Normally, I can't access the administrative interface on your router,
right?
Because I'm on the internet,
right?
But if I can talk to your WordPress that's on your LAN and say, "Hey, go talk to the LAN side of this router and change his DNS server to this," then I can compromise that LAN. Holy
crap!
Yeah.
Holy crap!
But that was just the first thing he tried. He also found that he could. So in addition to causing WordPress to execute his existing attacks against local routers that are on the same LAN as the WordPress site, Which it depends. If people are hosting WordPress at home, this is a big deal. If your WordPress is at GoDaddy, GoDaddy doesn't have a little, D-Link router somewhere that people are going to be able to access, right? Or change the DNS server on.
Right. I mean, this is
it's not returning the content or anything. It's just hitting the URL. You don't get to see the response.
This is such an interesting concept because this would be never a vulnerability I would think of when I think of hosting my own web server on my home LAN. I would never consider this one.
If you put WordPress on it, it might be able to compromise your router.
Right.
That's an interesting vector. But he also managed to basically map the content of a LAN. Basically, WordPress returns different error messages to the pingback request based on what happens. So the first thing is whether or not the URL resolves, right? If it can figure out the IP address. So using that, he was able to tell if specific host names exist or not. Especially in LANs, a lot of times you will create unqualified names via like a host file or a local DNS server. Like say SVN or Subversion or just a host name dev or file server or exchange or Bugzilla or whatever. Right? Little names for your internal servers that aren't qualified with like a domain name or anything.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And only resolve inside your LAN.
Right.
Well, because the WordPress pingback API returns one error if it resolves and one error if it doesn't, you can tell whether those domains exist or not. So you can find out, if they have a dev server or a file server or an exchange server or whatever behind on the same LAN as this WordPress just by sending a bunch of requests to the pingback API saying, try this URL, and so on. Also, it can be used as a port scanner because it's going to get a different error message, whether connection is refused, if it just times out, or if it actually establishes a connection. Mm-hmm. By basically sending http:// some IP address :22.
Right.
You can find out if there's an SSH server on an IP address on the LAN with that WordPress server. And so you can just, scan the entire IP range and be like, oh, look, there's a server over there and a server over there, and that one has SSH, and that one has Samba or whatever, and that one's an SQL server. And then, if you manage to exploit the WordPress in some other way to actually get a shell or something, then now you can access those things. So it's pretty interesting.
That's not when you said it could be used for LAN attacks. I'm like, what is he talking about? This is not what I expected at all.
Basically, a way to use WordPress to scan the LANs that are normally behind a firewall, right? Like that LAN isn't accessible from the internet,
right?
And we've talked about island hopping, getting access to one machine and then hopping over.
Yep.
Once you're inside. You compromise the first machine, now you're inside the LAN and you're allowed to do stuff that the internet isn't.
This is the reconnaissance of the future right here, Alan, where, you get in, you get intelligence, you get information, so then you know how to attack.
Map out the whole network and you know where everything is so that when you finally do get in, you don't spend the first 6 hours port scanning around.
Right.
You spend it, going
breaking in.
That has what you want on it.
Exactly. That's pretty incredible. Yeah. Wow. Well, should we stop right here or any other thoughts on that one? All right. Well,
that's the end of that story.
Let's take a break right here. This is sort of probably an appropriate place to mention our sponsors, GoDaddy. And Alan, I was just sitting here. I have a Microsoft pen. I just realized this pen that I've been playing with is a Microsoft pen. It says, "Are you ready for a new day?" And I thought, that's interesting. But the moral of the story is I am ready for a new day thanks to GoDaddy.com, Alan. And wait a minute, that's not GoDaddy.com. That's our voting page. No, here it is. GoDaddy.com has a great deal that expires at the end of this month. So this is one of your last opportunities to take advantage of it. Now, normally, GoDaddy has great prices on their .coms. $12.99 for a year. Sure, that's good. $12.99, that's actually pretty good from what it used to be back in my day, children.
I remember $70 for 2 years.
I know.
And that was like 2000 and like the year $2,000,
which felt just like today's dollars, really. So let me tell you something here. See, I got it printed out right here because it's just so unbelievable. I couldn't even, if you told me this was a real deal, I'd say you're lying, you're full of crap. But once it's printed, I have to believe it because we have .coms for $2.95 thanks to GoDaddy.com. You see that $12.99? That is expensive until at least the end of the month, and then it's back to just being a regular great deal. But no, we have a very special deal: $2.95 for up to 3 of them. For up to 3 of those .coms, $2.95, if you use our very special code when you check out TECH295. TECH295 when you check out to get a .com for $2.95. And you don't even have to have a Microsoft pen that says, "Ready for a new day," in what looks like some sort of font that I don't. It's like a knockoff font, like a Helvetica knockoff. I'm not sure, Alan, but I do know that if you use our code TECH295 when you check out at GoDaddy.com, you get that .com for $2.95. Or this also expires at the end of December. If you'd like to get a $4.99 SSL certificate, $4.99 SSL2 when you check out, $4.99 SSL2 when you check out to get an SSL cert for $4.95. Now, if you're some sort of pro shopper, you would check out with Tech295, get your $2.95.com, up to 3 of them, great deal, and then you go back in for a second round, and then you use that SSL code, $4.99 SSL2. You get the SSL for $4.99. You're walking away from this whole thing for like less than a trip to the Outback Steakhouse. Well, considerably less. And that's even, considering if you just went and gotten something cheap. And you don't even have to have a Microsoft pen like I have right here, right now.
Also, I did the math. $70 in $1998 is about $100 today.
Ouch. And it's happening all over again with like super high level, like .Christmas and stuff like that. They're all really expensive. Eventually they'll come down to us consumer price levels, But thank you to GoDaddy for sponsoring this week's episode of the TechSNAP program. And if you're running a WordPress blog on your home LAN, stop it. Stop it and go get yourself one of these. These guys are the professionals. They know how to host these kinds of things for you. And with their one-button WordPress deployment and updates, it's super easy to keep on top of it. So there's no excuse not to be secure and have your own blog that you control. So thank you to GoDaddy. All right, Alan. Now this next story, I say, hasn't gotten enough media attention, but you're here to break it down and let us know what's going on.
Well,
anybody that has a Samsung,
I'm not a Linux developer, so I don't know everything.
Come on now, don't sell yourself short. Anyway. You're one of the few people talking about it.
Some Samsung devices, specifically ones with this Inox CPU, have a vulnerability where, although it's not a problem with the CPU per se, but basically where full read-write access to all the memory on the device is allowed, which allows you to easily root the device, but also means that apps could exploit the device and do a bunch of nasty things.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically, in the custom Samsung kernel that's on these devices, in addition to the regular /dev/mem, which is your access, normally is restricted to only root.
Sure.
There's a device called dev xenox-mem. That particular device is world read and world writable. So any user, not even just root, but any user can read and write all the memory on the system.
That's horrible.
Yeah. Now, the device seems to currently only be used by the camera and the HDMI interface.
Okay.
But it can be used by anything.
You just have to write to it.
So basically, it seems that it's set up so that the camera doesn't have to run as root or something. But it's very bad. It could allow, the dumping of all the RAM on the device, which could expose passwords and stuff. Kernel code injection, because you can write to the RAM, you can cause code to be run by the kernel. Or, install malicious apps, or you can do anything, right? You have full access to all the memory on the device, so you can do whatever you want. Including basically rooting the device without having to flash the, whatever the one kind of RAM is called, the bootloader.
The ROM? Yeah.
The other, pre thing. I don't know. It's all in the instructions here.
All right, okay.
There's also a new app out called Enox Abuse. And basically what it does is, it allows you to root and unroot your device quickly. But the second thing is it does an init script that runs before all the apps in your Play Store and will chmod the vulnerable memory device so that only root has read and write access. So it removes the world read-write access by just chmodding the device at boot up. However, this may break your camera and the HDMI interface that rely on that device.
Oh, I love that.
But if you don't use the camera, and because the app allows you to turn it on and off, you can always re-enable it if you need to use the camera for a little bit or something.
Okay.
But it means that apps can't root your phone or exploit your machine or steal all your data or whatever. And so I have some links here that talk about the different parts.
I love how the Android community is like, well, I mean, this sucks. It's a horrible vulnerability, and it's completely improper that Samsung has built this in here. But let's go ahead and build a little app so that way people can start rooting their devices.
And disable the vulnerability so that nobody can do it after they do it.
And, it's interesting. The devices it affects are serious. Like, these are popular devices. The Samsung Galaxy S2, the Samsung Galaxy Note 2, and potentially all devices who embed the Inox. How do you say it? How did you say it?
I don't know how you're supposed to.
The Xeon processor, the 4210 and 4412 series.
That's
crazy, Alan.
Galaxy S2, some S3s and S3 LTEs, Galaxy Camera, Galaxy Note, Note 2, Note 2 LTE, Note 10.1, Galaxy Tab 7 Plus, Galaxy Tab 7.7, hard kernel, Odroid A and Odroid X, Lenovo K860s, Muzio or whatever that is.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
X2-core, 4-core, and MX2 phones. The Newman N2 and the Origin 4 dual and quad-core phones are among the ones known to be vulnerable.
I mean, the S2 and S3 and the Note are huge. Those are huge phones.
And Note 2 is very popular. It just came out. And basically, in the comments of the guy that found the vulnerabilities, like, either this is a glaring mistake by someone at Samsung,
huge,
or someone at Samsung should be fired for writing this on purpose.
Well, that's when I was almost. I mean, when it's this bad, you're like,
it's like let's just make a device. Okay, so the camera doesn't run as root, so it can't access the raw memory to do what to mmap the memory to take a picture or whatever. So let's just make a device to get around the fact that Linux has this protection against allowing everybody to read all the memory on the system.
In theory, shouldn't every other Android device have this same problem they have to work around?
I don't know.
See, sounds like some crap, Alan. It's some crap because, unfortunately, and I harp on this probably too much, but these Android devices don't always. Now, the higher end Galaxy models tend to be better at this, but they don't have always clear update paths. So sometimes users end up getting boned with software that will never be properly patched, and they just go on using it for years.
When you get not the vanilla version, but the version that's been modified by your cell phone carrier.
Right.
There's like an AT&T version or a Verizon version and so on.
Whenever you have to wait on the carriers, you always end up kind of...
And, when they make a bunch of changes to include all their bloatware and stuff, it means every version takes longer. And, and a lot of times they just don't offer updates. And, that's why I specifically bought the Google version of my phone. Right. Because my carrier doesn't modify it; they just give me the Google update straight away.
Yep. Yeah, I hope this gets patched. Seems like they could do basically what these guys are doing. They chmod it, and then Samsung could update their camera app to just work around this somehow. Maybe unchmod it for a few minutes. I don't know, and then chmod it back. I don't know.
Well, that would require root access, though. And
either way,
access, it wouldn't have this problem.
Right, yeah.
The funny part is this may have been done by Samsung specifically to make the camera not a vector for giving root to users.
Right. I bet you're right. That could have, yeah.
And they ended up making a much bigger hole for you to get through. It's like, let's close the window and open the door.
Well, there's a good chance people watching this might have one of these Samsung devices. Alan broke out the devices we know about in the show notes. You can just go look at the notes. You don't even have to click on a link. But if you want, we have links to the XDA post where they're discussing this.
The forums there on the Android community and the XDA communities go into it a bit more and basically have people reporting whether they got it to work or not on various devices. So their list of devices is possibly even more up to date already.
Growing,
I didn't have time to go through pages and pages of forum posts.
Samsung probably sells that chip to a lot of manufacturers.
Yeah, they're in the chip business. It's not necessarily specific to that chip. It's just the kernel that has this extra device added to it is used on the devices that use these specific chips.
Right.
It's when I originally saw the headline, I thought it was a flaw in the chip, which means it's very possible they wouldn't be able to fix it at all.
That's what got stuck in my head. I saw that same headline.
Do an update and it would be fixed.
So this is software fixable. That's an important part to underline there. They just have to do it.
But it comes down to, does it break the camera?
Yeah. Well, so anyways, while we're talking about the show notes,
the Nexus, it depends on the version. The new Nexus 10 or whatever, or Nexus 4, I forget what it's called.
Nexus 4 is the phone.
It uses the version 5 of that chip, so I'm not sure if it's vulnerable or not.
Stay tuned.
And it may also depend on whether if you're running a Samsung kernel or a different kernel on it.
Oh, because that's probably going to be stock Android on the Nexus 4.
Yeah, so I don't know specific devices, yes or no. The forums will know better than me.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on that?
I barely know anything about it, so I'm not a Linux hacker.
All right. Well, that's an interesting one, Alan. That is pretty interesting, and I really don't think it seems like pretty big, and I don't feel like a lot of people are talking about it in the tech press. Just kind of floating around out there.
I'm honestly surprised it's not being used as FUD about how Android is horrible and you shouldn't buy it.
Well, but doesn't sound like it's... Yeah, you're right. That it will probably actually happen, but it's not technically an Android fault. It's Samsung's fault.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Alan.
Samsung makes the most Android devices.
Yeah, they just
and actually they just surpassed, was it Nokia as the biggest manufacturer of cell phones.
Yep. And we have some more stories about them in the roundup later on. So before we move on, I want to remind folks that the TechSNAP program and all of our shows on the Jupiter Broadcasting Network, in a large part, are funded by our audience, you. That actually does mean you specifically. We need every single person to engage that can. That's how the system works. And what I'm talking about is our affiliate links that we have at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com. You click there before you shop. You probably have heard me mention these before, but it's always good to remind folks to make sure I set that programming in because we really do need your support. And we have browser extensions down there, too, that automatically manage that for you and tag your shopping sessions. Also, if you find programs like TechSNAP and the other shows on the network valuable and you have a couple extra dollars per month you want to kick in, maybe sort of think of it like the value you would for a good TV program you'd pay for your cable, or maybe something you'd buy online, and you can donate monthly, and that way you lock in funding for us and keep us going. As we wrap up the year, I look back and I think this system has worked pretty well for us in 2012. It's still growing. It's not exactly where it needs to be yet, but you guys are really making a difference in keeping us on the air. And it's as our costs have increased as a company, the support from our audience has almost matched it time for time, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So thank you to everybody who uses those affiliate links at the bottom of our site, or even donates and locks in some funding every single month. I really do appreciate it. It keeps Alan and I going, and keeps the Jupiter Broadcasting Network lights on, as it were. Literally, there's expensive studio lights on right now. And, it keeps me supplied in these awesome Microsoft pens, which, by the way, Alan, this Microsoft pen has a clicky thing. Doesn't actually extend the pen. To extend the pen, you have to twist the bottom.
What's the clicky thing do? Just click?
Yep.
Some people are crazy about the clicking.
It's a Microsoft UI thing. I don't...
The pen I have on my desk is from my dentist because it writes well.
All right, Alan. With all of the news done, that must mean it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or starting a thread in our subreddit at links.techsnap.tv. Mr. Jude, are you ready for our first email this week? We got a couple. We got a few. All right. It comes from Captain Vimos. So good morning. Love the show, even though it seems to create a lot of work for me. Every episode either has something that needs fixed or something cool we should implement. I have a wee question, though. That's funny. I love that. I love we're creating him work. I mean, I think that's actually a good thing. He says,
it does the same thing for me half the time.
Yeah, every show creates a bunch of work for us, too. We've got a whole bunch of servers, about a 50-50 split between Windows and Ubuntu, but we're having a go at FreeBSD now. We've got a bunch of spare servers, mostly Dell 2950s and R710s, that we're waiting to repurpose as basic storage. I started with FreeNAS as it seemed a quicker way to test the principles of ZFS than learning a proper FreeBSD from scratch. Anyways, it's going fine so far, but I'm struggling with figuring out how to monitor the hardware. The smart test alert if I rip a drive out. The smart test alerts if I rip a drive out, but I'd like to be able to monitor the RAM and PSU and all the like. I've got NRPE installed for Nagios, but I haven't been able to find anything on how to install Dell OpenManage. Nagios is our preferred monitoring tool, but I'm open to suggestions. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, I don't know if the Dell specific tools are going to install.
Yeah.
Like even under Linux emulation, they might not work. I monitor some stuff like the power supplies in the server with IPMI, which Dell's DRAC is mostly a re-implementation of. So you might be able to get some of the information that way. And basically there's certain commands you send.
Now hold on. Here's my question, though. If he's using Nagios, Nagios can just use SNMP, and isn't it then just
right? But SNMP doesn't necessarily expose things like the temperature of your RAM, right? That's like a specific hardware monitor.
I guess it depends on your SNMPs, because like on a Linux box, I can monitor a lot of those stats through SNMP.
Well, yeah, I get a lot of my stats over SNMP, although there's some like the status of the power supplies that are specific to the manufacturer of the power supply.
You almost would have to have like a driver provided by them to get
right. So I'm actually using the IPMI, the platform management like out of band system to monitor those specific pieces of hardware. The other thing is there's tools in the port tree like MBMon, which is a motherboard monitor. which can, you can say what's the temperature of the CPU and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
And from those, basically push those, have Nagios call those. Or you can even configure your SNMP daemon to run those in the background on an interval and publish the stats via SNMP. What other things have I done? Well, in FreeBSD, there's modules called, there's one called Core Temp and one called AMD Temp. They're kernel modules, and they basically add the temperature information about your CPU to the sysctl system, which you can then monitor somehow. That's how I monitor CPU temperature on all of our servers. But alerts on a hardware error, if you have Nagios monitoring it, it can push the alert, or you can configure an SNMP trap. Also, IPMI, a lot of times, like I know in the super micros they have it, which is what I use, but I'm pretty sure Dells will have it as well, where the out-of-band management system, like DRAC on a Dell, can do an SNMP trap. So that's when the service will actually push something to the SNMP server when there's a problem with certain pieces of hardware.
Right.
And so you can configure, there's ways to set up Nagios to receive those traps. And you can actually raise the alert in Nagios that way as well. But I don't know about Dell Open Manage specifically.
Yeah.
I know some places have pretty fancy IPMI integration. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they're using Dells or Supermicros for that though.
I had a recent Nagios success story. I was using Hyperic for monitoring, which isn't bad, but the free version was much too limited for what I wanted. And I introduced my client to something called FAN, Fully Automated Nagios, which is a combination of CentOS and a bunch of tools around Nagios, like Centron and Nagios Viz, Nagios itself, SNMP, all the utilities.
Someone said something about FAN on Twitter, and they uppercased it, and I didn't make the connection that it's actually a tool, not just that he was a fan of Nagios Viz. He talked about using FAN and Nagios Viz. I
was pretty impressed with it, to tell you the truth, because it really made it easy to roll. But the cool thing about it, too, is during the installation, you can say, is this a Nagios Polar? Is this going to be just the database backend, or is this an all-in-one system? Anyways, I went on and on about it in season 24, episode 10 of last week's Linux Hits the Fan. I actually went through setting up fully automated Nagios in the show, adding a host, all through the web UI, which is really super easy to use. And I was able to create accounts for my client, and they can sit down now and they can add their own servers. They can go in there and acknowledge alerts. It makes Nagios super approachable for them. And if you're getting into it, I would recommend check it out. Maybe go watch the episode last.
It's funny because this week I've been rewriting our entire Nagios setup. I re-implemented a lot of my configs with a template I wanted, and I mostly moved all the configs into a Subversion instead of just having them willy-nilly on the server. But the other thing is I've configured escalations.
Oh, yeah.
So that my phone won't get a text message about a server having a problem unless it's having a problem for at least 30 minutes.
Yeah. Cut down on the noise.
A little too often, you get a text message at like 3 a.m. in the morning saying, oh no, random server in Amsterdam is down. And then 3 minutes later, never mind, it's back up.
Right.
It's like it wasn't actually down, it was just being slow or whatever.
Or a route, one of the routers in the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it takes 5 minutes for BGP to converge.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, I would like to stop getting those. So configured escalation, so when I get it, my secondary inbox gets an email. But when it's important, my primary inbox gets an email, and my cell phone gets an SMS message.
Escalations are great.
Yes.
All right.
And a bunch of other things, adding a bunch more graphs and playing more with JMX to actually monitor Java stuff. We have it pulling stats now from our video servers of like the cache hit and miss ratios and how full the cache is and stuff. And graphing those in Nagios with Nagios Graph. Nagios Viz looked cool. If I was an ISP, I'd be using that.
Yeah,
but
it's pretty intense.
I don't have any point-to-point links that I need to monitor to around the world. But the graphs look very much like what one of my ISP uses, and I wonder if they're actually using that.
Oh, yeah. It comes in the fan distribution. When you set it up, it comes with Nagios Viz preloaded, and it's got like some demo.
Right. I'm wondering if OVH, the French ISP, is using that because their maps, their network weather map looks exactly like that, but it might be that the Nagios Viz is just inspired by the same app that whatever OVH uses. But
it's pretty cool.
Yep.
All right. Should we move on to Zach's question?
Sure. But yeah, for hardware monitoring, sometimes you have to piecemeal it together. It's not as great. I don't know
I
that much
agree.
about Dell Open Manage because I've never used it.
Yeah, I know. I've had it loaded on systems. I've always found it works best on a Red Hat system or a Windows box. The Open Managed stuff. A Windows box, to be completely honest, has always been my best experience with that software. So I kind of stopped using it. All right. Zach writes in. He said, I recently inherited an old server. It has an Intel Xeon CPU. It's old. 4 gigs of RAM, 73 and two of them, 73 gigabyte hard drives in a RAID. It currently runs Windows Server 2003, which I'm going to wipe for Linux. My question is, what file system is best for servers and RAID? I've only really used desktop computers, so I'm only familiar with Extended 4. Thank you. And this is an interesting question. A file system for RAID.
Well, that's an easy answer, but he's not going to like it.
Right. Well, so, he's using Linux.
ZFS.
I would say...
But not on Linux. So
and he mentions it's a Dell server, so he's probably using like a PERT controller or something like that to manage the RAID. So
and it's a rather old Xeon. He doesn't mention specific one or anything, probably because some of the older Xeons didn't actually have a model number that easily described what they were. But
yes. Hello. Maybe that's Zach.
Anyway, it's a rather old machine, and I'm not sure how useful it is. Especially those are probably SCSI hard drives, even judging by the size.
Probably Ultra 320s or something. Yeah.
Yeah. But if the RAID is hardware RAID, then what file system you put on top of it probably doesn't matter that much.
No.
It's possibly easiest to just go with whatever the default is for whatever distribution he wants to use.
Yeah, I'd say
whether that's ext3 or 4 or whatever.
It's probably Extended 4, and that just makes the most sense right now for Linux.
And with it being so small, you don't necessarily need ZFS. Although ZFS is the best. If you're going to do ZFS, though, you'd want to pass the 2 drives through the RAID controller without doing any RAID on them.
Yeah.
And let ZFS do the RAID.
And if he is going to do a soft RAID under Linux, I would still recommend Extended 4. Doesn't change my recommendation, so.
But...
All right, Zach. Well, good luck with the old rig. And then attach some external storage or do a little iSCSI action and make that into a file-serving beast and let us know how it goes, Zach. All right. Ryan writes in with 3 points, and one of them might hit a little close to home. You'll see why. He writes in, number 1, in episode 82 of TechSNAP, you had an ongoing war story of an ISP provider hauling fuel up 17 flights of stairs to fill their generator tanks. You have got to have one of those guys on the show for an interview, as I think it'd be very entertaining and enlightening.
I don't even have any specific names or anything.
Yeah, I agree. It would be a lot of fun, but and it's also the window of news interest has kind of moved.
Yes.
Hate to be a slave to that, but it is true. Number 2, with the release of Samba 4 this past week, Linux is now poised more than ever to infiltrate the small business market. It's funny because he used the term SMB when talking about Samba in the small business market, given its AD implementation. But what mail server software would you recommend? I've looked at many different ones on the web, but wondered what you guys have good success
It really
with.
depends what your requirements are.
I'm betting, I think he means an Exchange replacement if he's talking about Active Directory.
Right, but how many of the features of Exchange are you using? Like, if you just need IMAP email, then, you got your...
Yeah.
For IMAP, you probably Dovecot, and then, putting it with XM or Postfix.
Yeah.
And that'll do a lot of what you want. Like, even... Google's moving away. Google's discontinuing their server that pretends to be Exchange so that you can sync all your stuff in the Exchange style.
Right.
And moving to their, what's it called, like CalDAV or something.
Yeah.
That does it over IMAP. And so you can probably get away with doing most of it that way. Also, Samba 4 and your IMAP mail server solution will run fine on FreeBSD. Doesn't have to be Linux.
I would say if he wants like a real Exchange killer with, all of the integrated crap that Exchange has, which, by the way, like for Jupiter Broadcasting, we just use Google hosted apps, to be honest. Yep. And you get all of the calendar and docs and all that stuff.
At Scale Engine, we have our own hosted Postfix plus Dovecot set up with RT for tickets. Nice.
So what I use for my clients that don't want to have their stuff hosted with Google is Zimbra. Zimbra is an open source exchange killer. It has all of those types of features, an amazing web UI that you can use that is as fully functional as a desktop email client. They got bought out by by VMware a year or two ago. One of the neat things about it, though, is they have a fully functional open source edition, and you can just download it as a VM appliance just to try it out. And then the OS is already loaded. Zimbra itself is already installed. And what I like about Zimbra is it's a really good mail system that just sits on top of standard open source software. Postfix, Postgres, or MySQL for the mail store backend. All these tools that if you were going to roll your own mail server, you'd probably just use yourself anyways. Zimbra is sitting on top of that stuff and ties it all together with really nice web admin interface. Super easy to set up users. You can integrate it in with another LDAP server like your Active Directory server. So then if you're using LDAP backend for Active Directory on Samba, you can then tie in Zimbra so that way you have single sign-on accounts and stuff like that. That's what I've done in the past. It does take some work. And honestly, it's a lot easier just to go with like Google Apps hosted if you can. But you might check out Zimbra. All right, he's got one last point, Alan, and I want you to gird your loins for this one because it's gonna hit close to home. I've been watching TechSNAP and LAS with regularity for quite some time, and my wife occasionally will sit down with me in my family room while I get my geek on. She had the following to say. She says, "Why does Chris have such a great background behind him, and Alan just has this screen?" And he said, he explained, well, Chris is using a green screen. Alan needs to do something because that backdrop is just not aesthetically pleasing, said my wife. Now, he came to your defense and said, well, he's buying a new house soon, so perhaps that will change. Just gotta love our wives.
Well, the screen is there to hide the pile of boxes. And my couch and my coffee table that you would think was a coffee table until you saw that it was piled with computer parts.
That's actually why I buy screens here, too.
and sadly, at the new house, you're just as likely to be staring at a blank wall.
And see,
will that please you? Is that aesthetically pleasing?
I defend my background. I have hiked to these locations every episode. I travel somewhere unique before the show. Sometimes I have to fly at my own expense. And then I sit down and we do the show on location. So the insinuation that this is a green screen somehow is insulting. No, thanks, Ryan. That was really great.
But yeah, it's most likely going to be a blank wall. And if you're lucky, my... The giant world map poster that's behind me now will maybe cover up the blank wallness.
Maybe the TechSNAP audience and I could pool our resources together like in a Google community and come up with some backgrounds to send you. And then you could just post them up there, big posters. All right, Alan, we have another email from JT, and this one's interesting. I'm kind of curious to hear your reaction to this. He says, I started listening to the show like a month ago. I really love the show. I came across it while on YouTube trying to get information on Nginx. I was watching an old episode, I think it was from like 6 weeks ago, and somebody asked if there's a better way to manage the configuration for OpenVPN. I'd like to recommend using Access Server from OpenVPN, and he links to the Access Server. He says it's a really nice GUI. They give you up to 2 licenses for free, but you can buy more for $5 per user per year. It's worth it. You can create routes for each user right in the GUI, and it's very easy to remove users, etc. Hopefully this helps somebody. Thanks, JT. So there you go. It's called Access Server, and it's put out by the OpenVPN project. Alan, have you heard of this? What do you think?
No, I probably wouldn't have considered it for my solution because it costs $5 a user. Although I think you get the first 2 free, so depending on your use, it might. And if even in a corporate environment, $5 a user is not really a problem. It's $5 a year per user, so that's very easily reasonable. Doable. Yeah. It's if you're needing a VPN for a lot of people, that price makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. All right. So check it out. It seems like a cool solution.
Yep, and you can find that email in the show notes, and that's where it'll be linked. Now, our next email comes in from another Ryan, and he's doing a little domain spotting for us. I thought you might like to know that TechSNAPpodcast.com and LastPodcast.com are available. I was thinking of picking these guys up for you as a gift, and then making you both admins, but then I thought better of it since you couldn't really trust it, since you wouldn't be in full control. This is my first time contacting you, and you don't know that. I'll do something nefarious with these after 3 months or something. Obligatory love the show. Keep it up. Thanks. And he has also a $5 a month subscriber. What do you think, Alan? Should we go grab TechSNAPpodcast.com?
We have TechSNAP.tv. Isn't that better?
That's true. It's shorter. I don't know. I'm going to think about it for $2.95.
Well, yeah.
I might do it for $2.95. I think I will do it. I might do that for the show because if I remember, why not? All right. So now this one, Alan, it's been a little while since we've had a Hall of Shame submitter. So I want to set it up again. So we have a Hall of Shame deal. If you go over to our TechSNAP subreddit, on the right-hand side of our subreddit, we keep a running permanent list of people that have been submitted to the Hall of Shame. So far, we have 6 companies in there. Uporn.com is the first, Microsoft is the second, Sony, Stratford, the government of Norway, and then number 6 is Cryptic Studios. Now, the qualification is something has to get at least 5 votes and be labeled Hall of Shame submission in order for it to be considered. And now 5 votes doesn't seem like a lot, but that also means, you have to be able to sustain down votes. So this week, Alan, we got something that reached 7 votes. It's been a while since we've had it. Here it comes. It comes from C. Patrick 08. The Alabama Department of Education should be considered for the Hall of Shame. I requested my password to be reset, and when I typed in my email, I got my username and password sent back to me in plain text. The following is the email I got back, and then he removes it. Of course, he removes the important information, but you can see right here in the email.
Yep.
They're sending all his information, clear text, giving him a URL to click on, an email to contact. And this is the thing. This is what the Hall of Shame is all about, is we need to shame these companies into changing their bad security practices. Because
yes.
it is almost 2013.
Plain text or reversible encryption on passwords is bad.
2013. This isn't 1994, right? This isn't like we're just figuring stuff out for the very first time on people connecting to remote databases like in the early 90s, and the web is brand new and it's totally understandable. No, it's almost 2013. So I say, Alabama Department of Education, you have been submitted to the TechSNAP Hall of Shame number 7. I hope you guys take this to heart. Think about what you've done. Maybe come back to us after you fix your problems, and we'll reconsider removing. No. You know what? No. You stay on the list forever.
Yes.
Been shamed. All right, Alan. Well, folks can send in their feedback. We need some more. Email us techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or hit that contact link at the top of our website, or start a thread, just like C. Patrick 08 did in TechSNAP, links.techsnap.tv.
Because I might have one for next week.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
All right, there you go.
Different government somewhere.
Nice. All right, Alan, with the feedback done.
States, but anyway.
Alan?
Yes.
With the feedback done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, maybe give you some links to follow up on your own, get you interested, and a lot of these links are provided by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Mr. Allen, are you ready for our first Roundup story?
Yep.
Alrighty. A malware-infested Sudoku puzzle puzzles researchers. I like this one. It's a puzzle in a puzzle. I heard you like puzzles.
Well, yes. But basically, it's, the rage from the 90s making a comeback.
Yeah.
Macro viruses for Excel and Word were a big thing in the 90s,
right.
Such that Microsoft defaults to disabling running macros a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like Office 2000 or something.
Yeah.
But this set of Sudoku puzzles basically socially engineers people into re-enabling it, because it's like, well, this thing will generate random Sudoku puzzles for you. So it obviously that is going to require allowing the macro to run. And so people allow the macro to run, and it installs malware on their computer. Which then downloads other malware, and then the whole computer is compromised.
That's so retro. I like it. It's kind of classic.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Macro viruses are back, folks. Go patch your antivirus, get your scanners going, and make sure you don't have any malware on their macros. I don't know. Yeah. All right, now this next story is a Java update.
Yes.
Was a surprising move.
Yeah, Java 7 Update 10 it was just released, and it includes a new Java control panel option that allows you to disable running Java in the browser.
That's awesome.
So basically, in the Java control panel, you can say, I want to still have Java installed because I need to run so-and-so Java app, but I don't want Java to ever run in the browser.
I'm impressed they did
I'm not sure what that really accomplishes. I disabled Java in the browser using the browser's controls.
Yeah.
But that might have something to do with the fact that I was using Firefox and I had that option.
Yeah, multiple browsers.
Other
browsers.
Nice and if you use multiple browsers, and it's probably best to turn it on in both places, because if you leave it on in one and off in the other, it's possible that an exploit in one could allow it to happen anyway.
Yeah.
But if you still need Java, I use it for a server management tool. but I don't want it to ever run in my web browser, it's very handy to have this option.
Our next story is
and it's also interesting to see Oracle admitting that Java is
big of them to
very
do this.
exploitable.
I think it's big of them to actually say, you know what, we're going to give you a way to disable our own product, even though we want you to use it.
It's not on by default or anything, so it's really only an option for developers that need it for something,
or IT guys to set.
Yeah, I suppose you could do. The Windows installer, you can cause the default to be off by running the installer with a certain command line switch. So in a corporate environment, you could probably deploy it in such a way that it's off by default.
That's not bad. I like that. All right, so whenever...
Although there's no command line way to do it in Linux.
Son of a... table flip. Whenever we talk about ZFS, somebody always emails and says, well, what about ButterFS? And then last week we saw the OpenSUSE camp come out and say, ButterFS is production ready. Now, I don't know if I have any comments on that, but this next story is maybe not so good for ButterFS enthusiasts, is it?
Right. So basically it's a hash collision denial of service, similar to the ones we saw with PHP about a year ago or so, and ones we've seen with other things a whole bunch of time. Basically, ButterFS uses the CRC32C checksum for the files. And basically, if you purposely create a bunch of files that cause a collision, then it can possibly prevent someone from creating a file with a specific name. Right? Because if the name is going to have the same CRC collision, basically it causes the hash engine inside ButterFS to have to do a lot of extra work before it can add that file. If you create enough of those, you could cause it so it would take like many, many minutes or long enough that it doesn't actually ever happen on the ButterFS. So you could say, in this certain directory like /tmp, never allow a file with this name to exist by creating a huge number of hash collisions on that CRC32.
Now, some folks in the chat room are saying that this looks like it's already been fixed in the upstream code.
At first, the developers weren't that interested in the one. They're like, well, a hash collision is a hash collision. There's not, but as the research kept going and things kept coming out about it and so on, they're hoping to have it in the next version of the Linux kernel to have it fixed. But they also ended up finding a bug in Bash at the same time, because when they tried to remove all the things, it took so long. It caused Bash to go into an infinite loop. But even then, they found that a possible denial of service type there as well, is that trying to clean up all these files created with the hash collisions would take a very long time as well.
Yeah, that's true. All right, next story in the roundup was one of the highest voted stories in our subreddit this week. Wikipedia is moving from MySQL to, is it MariaDB?
Yeah, MariaDB, which is basically just a fork of MySQL.
Right, you actually talked about it last week.
The main reason Wikipedia is doing this is because they want to get behind the open source version of MySQL. Basically, Oracle keeps making silly moves that are making MySQL not that open source anymore.
Yeah.
Like, they release changes, but no changelog. And so even like places like MariaDB are like, we import their changes, but half the time we don't know. We have to like figure out what the change was by looking at the source code changes. Like
that's being a bad open source citizen.
Yeah. And so Wikipedia is like, we want to go behind one of the major open source branches, and we're trying to get everybody behind one to kind of make a default vendor kind of thing. I'm still using Percona, but I may look at Maria since it includes most of the features of Percona anyway. Like, and then Wikipedia is like, there are some performance gains we're seeing, although part of that is they're moving from MySQL 5.1 to MariaDB 5.5, which is based on MySQL 5.5, which includes some performance enhancements. So stock out of the box, MySQL 5.5 versus Maria 5.5, there's probably not that big of a difference.
Okay.
But MariaDB does include a number of extra features, and I don't know specifically which ones, but in Percona, some of the things you're getting are the Google user stats patch, which is very handy for figuring out where your CPU time in your MySQL server is going to. Mm-hmm. But the biggest one is Percona has extra DB, which is a drop-in replacement for InnoDB that is even better, and especially better at SSDs. Ah. And I know that's an option under MariaDB now as well.
Okay.
So yeah, looks like maybe MariaDB is going to become the new standard instead of MySQL.
I think so. All right, now the next story was another very highly voted story in our subreddit. Cox Communications is injecting code into into general web traffic to announce an email outage that they had.
Yeah, so Cox is a cable company like Comcast, and they had their like IMAP or POP3 server for customers who had emails at like cox.com or whatever
And
it
they
is.
did like this big gnarly injection.
Yeah, so basically, they looked for regular web traffic and into it injected code into random web pages that would cause a pop-up to pop up on your screen announcing the outage.
Yeah, literally they
Very
inject code.
nefarious. It's like, well, obviously this could have caused problems with the websites you were trying to visit as they're injecting random code into them.
Yeah.
But also, it's just a startling thing for the ISP to be doing, to just inject random code into websites, while you're viewing them.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like this. It's this gnarly Big Brother like. It obviously registered pretty strongly with our subreddit too. It has the sort of creepiness to it.
Yeah,
and over the top too. And honestly, most people don't even use their crappy ISP email. Well, that's not true. That's actually not true.
Yeah, a lot of people do, and then end up regretting it after they have that ISP for many years, and then they move or switch ISPs or something, and that email goes away.
Just in time for a white Christmas, Alan, hackers have hacked an industrial heating system using backdoors posted online.
Well, specifically, the SCADA system for this building's air conditioning and heating system uses a standard SCADA framework called Niagara X or something like that, which is known to have exploits. So anything hooked up to this Niagara framework is exploitable, which just happens to include all the HVAC systems installed by an unnamed company in New Jersey.
Now,
so hackers could take over the HVAC system at a number of different large buildings.
I see. So anything that uses these. So and HVAC just happens to be one of the systems that use these.
Yes.
Okay.
And the things you could do with that could be pretty bad. You could negatively affect air quality, or stop adding new oxygen to the air or something. Just keep recirculating the same air until it gets really stale, or you could make the building smell bad so people want to leave, or just make it really hot or really cold so people leave.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Just to make it easier to rob the place, or who knows what you're doing. Or interesting attack against computers. Make the building really hot.
Right.
Especially if they have a separate climate control zone for the a data center or just a computer room in the building, just jack up the heat and kill all their computers.
Yeah.
So definitely an interesting type of attack.
Jeez Louise. All right, Alan. Should you jump to the next story?
Sure.
This next story kind of is like a report that's like everybody knows it, but now we have hard evidence to back it up. Data caps are just a cash cow for internet providers.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we saw this coming online this week, and essentially goes to point out that after they did this page, and you can read it if you want. We'll have it linked, but it's about 13 pages long, and it essentially finds that thanks to the fact that these companies essentially have a duopoly, they're able to raise the prices on the data caps, and even though they should theoretically, reduce usage because people don't have any other place to go, they just end up being a massive cash generator.
Yeah.
And
basically, they don't actually solve the problem they were designed to.
Right,
which
of course.
Is the capacity
Reduce usage.
congestion problems that the ISPs have, especially during peak times.
Yep.
Because, if you have a limit, you're just more likely to do less during off time and the same amount or more during the peak time.
I'm not surprised by that one at all. All right, Alan, this is some good news, though. SSDs continue their 3-year price plunge, which I've noticed, too.
Obviously, though.
Yeah. But, I got to say, 2012 was really kind of the year that I just sort of switched over to using SSDs in almost all of from my main OS drive and almost all my systems. SSDs make such a huge difference. So, yeah.
Bought quite a few SSDs, although I've not actually switched to using them as OS drives that much.
Oh, come on.
Mostly I've been buying SSDs for database servers and things like that.
Yeah.
My PC happens to have one for the OS drive, and my laptop, one of the 3 OSs on it is on an SSD.
There you go.
But
but it's interesting because the prices have dropped 20% in just the second quarter of 2012 alone.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. I'm loving it.
Yeah.
I'm loving it.
Although, they're still rather expensive.
All right,
Especially if you want like the close to 500 gig size ones.
yes.
I
Yeah,
still
oh boy,
paid a lot of money for the 480 gig one.
Now, some bad news for some players of the Heroes of Newerth. Their password database was compromised, the game services was, and they're recommending that people change their passwords. And even if they've already changed them once before, right after it happened, they're recommending they change them again.
Right, because the database was still being compromised actively when people were changing their passwords. So if the attackers just looked up your password a second time, they would get the new one.
Yep.
Seems to suggest that their database didn't employ any type of hashing. They were literally just storing passwords in plain text.
Yeah.
So that's bad.
We don't know, but we suspect.
Also, this came to light when a number of players who were broadcasting on Twitch.tv, a live gaming service from Justin.tv, were being hacked like while they were broadcasting. And some of those specific people were also having their Twitter accounts compromised because they used the same password for Twitter as they did for their game. Don't reuse your passwords.
Different password for each service and site, people. That's all it takes to be a little more secure, to be a lot more secure.
The chat room says that they were using unsalted MD5s for the passwords, and so you can rainbow table the shit out of that in no time.
Yeah, we've talked about that. All right, so the U.S. CERT has released a warning of Adobe Shockwave Extras vulnerability. Oh, great.
Great. So basically, a design flaw in Adobe Shockwave. The warning covers 3 different vulnerabilities. The most interesting one is one where, based on how you embed the Shockwave, you can basically instruct Shockwave to use an older version of Shockwave to run the content. So even if you, say, have upgraded to a not vulnerable version,
right,
you can sometimes trick Shockwave into running an older version to that's still vulnerable so that they can exploit it.
Of course you can. Of course you can. Why wouldn't you be able to do that? So what do you do? Just remove it from your system? Because apparently not even patching in this scenario will fix it.
Well, hopefully the next patch will solve it properly.
Yeah, no kidding.
There was one of the other vulnerabilities was interesting too. The other thing is, so extras are like plugins for Shockwave, and basically you could Shockwave will load them without asking if they're signed by Adobe, but attackers can basically cause you to load old versions that have known vulnerabilities that have already been fixed. But because those are still signed by Adobe, they'll be loaded without asking you. So maybe Adobe should always ask you, and also maybe automatically disable the loading of any version that's older or known to be vulnerable or something.
Which is usually every version besides the current one.
Yeah,
and even sometimes the current one.
Yeah.
All right. Should we jump over to this Oracle story?
Yep.
Now, finally, people's questions have been answered. An official document containing policies and pledges for customers of Oracle's cloud service reveals that many aspects fall in line with industry standards, while others may prompt cause for worry among customers, according to analysts.
Yes, although this document is official and apparently secret, it's posted on their public website.
The rules of Oracle's cloud, huh?
Yes. And some of the interesting ones are some of the terms of like their service level agreement.
Yeah.
They claim they'll maintain 99.5% uptime or planned uptime.
Okay.
So there's like they're only guaranteeing that they won't have scheduled downtime but they're not guaranteeing about unscheduled downtime at all.
Yeah.
They talk about how they're going to defend against denial of service attacks, but then in a different section, there's a disclaimer saying they're not responsible for what happens during denial of service attacks. And basically, they're just trying to get rid of any responsibility for anything ever. And also, they have like the ability to just completely switch off your cloud or lock you out of your data if there's a dispute or a billing problem or whatever. If Oracle decides, then no, you can't have your data that's in the cloud.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem when you rely on a cloud provider. And it's good people are looking at these terms of services and stuff.
That's why we hope to see more things like OpenStack and CloudStack and so on, where we can kind of have these vendor-neutral solutions where if you have a problem with vendor A, you can just switch to vendor B without having to rebuild your whole cloud infrastructure.
Honestly, you got to wonder, Alan, if Scale Engine isn't sort of perfectly positioned for people to get into all of these types of services, realize they hit these walls, and then say, if I was just built on standard technologies and regular open source software or even non-open source software, I wouldn't have to worry about this. Because Scale Engine, you're more like, you want to just run it here? Yeah, we have the technology to do it. You're not going to, you don't lock me into some sort of, I don't have to have my website written to some sort of Scale Engine API or something like that. And
we try to design everything so it works just off the shelf because it's less work that way.
Yeah, but when you look at things like
it's easier for us to migrate you from your used to have a dedicated server, and this other customer just used shared web hosting.
Yeah,
and if we can just pick up your files, move them over, and it works,
it's better for you guys too.
It's better for us too.
It's so funny because people are getting locked into these services and they're not thinking like, well, what if I need to leave?
Yeah.
And,
especially with some of them.
If they can just shut you down, if they can, and I've gotten close before where Google turned off my account one day because they had made a mistake. And let me tell you how getting my Google account turned off fundamentally altered everything from my Android, my Google Voice stuff, all of my YouTube stuff, everything got just ruined. And it was like, wow, what a realization that was. And I think about like that kind of stuff for a business. It just seems crazy to me to depend on people like that. But hey, that's my soapbox.
I tell people the same thing about a bunch of the competitors to Scale Engine for video streaming are offering packages with like unlimited streaming for $100 a month or something. And it's like, well, as a case study in that, look what happened with Chris and Blip TV. Yeah. They're like, all the bandwidth you can eat for $8 a month.
Until you use it.
And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, we're losing money on that, so we're going to stop that now.
Well, and you mentioned Twitch TV, and I think like, how the hell are they going to ever...
Exactly. It's part of Justin.tv, and eventually they're just going to run out of their startup funding.
They just run off of startup funding, and not only that, but they're streaming copywritten material, which I know there's a provision for gaming and public viewing, but it's still a little murky, and the bandwidth requirements of just all of it is just phenomenal. It just blows my mind.
Well, yeah, I know, because I know some people that do live stuff from gaming events and stuff, and they're using Twitch TV, and I'm like, well, you should look at Scale Engine, and they're like, yeah, but this is free. I'm like, for now.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's like building, for them, whatever. But if you're building a business thing, if you're building that on like livestream.com, which is eventually going to either have to charge you for the amount of bandwidth you use or go away, they've already changed the pricing out from under people 2 or 3 times over the last 2 years. If you're building your business on a platform like that,
and the other problem with that, and the live stream is a great example.
We'll be there to catch you when you fall, but if you'd just been with us, you wouldn't fall down.
Live stream is another great example where you sort of end up engineering a solution specifically for live stream in terms of video streaming, and it's not as locked in as something like the Oracle Cloud is, but it's not still quite as portable. People really need to evaluate all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, Alan. Well, that just about wraps up this episode. Now we want to hear from you guys. We need to get some more questions.
There's one more news story.
Oh, there is?
Large donation from Mark Cuban and Marcus Persson, who's Notch from Minecraft, have allowed the EFF to create the Mark Cuban chair for eliminating stupid patents, which is basically a permanent staff position where they'll have a lawyer that sits there and lobbies and comments on court cases and all the stuff that the EFF does, specifically about stupid patents.
This is a thing we need. I mean, I hate that this is a thing we need, but it is a thing we need. Yep. And hopefully some of the patent trolls can get smashed. A little whack a patent troll, right?
Sadly, the only way to fight lawyers is with lawyers.
Although if you're a lawyer, we love you and thank you for watching.
Yes.
All right. So I was just saying, you can send us your questions, TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com, or fill out that contact form.
More questions. We need questions.
Yep. And over the holiday, news starts to slow down. So we could also use your help in our subreddit next week if you want to submit stories and vote on them. I think we'll need a little extra elbow grease from you guys because honestly, it gets a little hard to catch a good story during the holidays because a lot of people just, they close up shop and they're not making news. But I know it's out there. We can still find it. So with your help...
There's a bunch of leftover stuff.
Well, you've already got stuff you're working on, But go over to links.techsnap.tv and vote, vote up, vote down, submit stories, all that kind of stuff. Add your thoughts in the comment section. All that kind of stuff would be really helpful always, but specifically next week.
It's our last episode of the year, so if there's anything else you want to see in 2012, you better hurry up.
Yeah, no kidding. And then, of course, that's assuming we don't all blow up tomorrow at the end of the world.
We won't, so see you next week.
All right, there you go. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week, I hope.